talks between organized labor and the government have stalled yet again after a proposed minimum wage of 45,000 naira a month was met with a walkout by labor unions, while the unions described the offer as ridiculous. Now here's what the president of the Nigerian Labour Congress, Joe Ajero, had to say after the meeting.
The government's proposal of a paltry 48,000 naira as the minimum wage does not only insult the sensibilities of Nigerian workers, but also falls significantly short of meeting our needs and aspirations. In contrast, organized private sector proposed an initial offer of 54,000, though it is worth noting that even the least paid workers in the private sectors receive 78,000 naira. As clearly stated by the organized private sector, highlighting the stark disparity between the proposed minimum wage and prevailing standards, further demonstrating the unwillingness of the employers and government to faithfully negotiate a fair national minimum wage for workers in Nigeria. So I think maybe they should go back to drawing board. And of course, between now and the end of the month is enough time.
Well, we're joined now by former Kaduna Central Senator Shehu Sani. Good to see you and thanks for your time. Well, going back to the drawing board, that's if you have a board in the first place. Well, just to make fun of this whole serious business. Now, minimum wage, Edo State has set a standard. Let's start from there. And some are saying even if the government was serious about it, you should at least look at Edo State that has set its minimum wage or at 70,000 naira. But with what's playing in Nigeria at the moment, what do you think should be the ideal minimum wage?
Thank you very much for having me in your program. Well, first of all, the position advanced by Labour reflects the position of a typical Nigerian worker. Taking cognizance of the inflation, which includes the prices of food, of commodities, rent, tuition fees, and the general cost of living. Now, I don't know how, looking at the situation we find ourselves today, with the withdrawal of subsidy, the falling value of the naira, and so many issues being attached to the dollar. So I don't know how a Nigerian can survive with less than $100,000, 100,000 naira. Now, if you check it very well and you break down what the government is offering, whether 45 or 48,000 naira, you will see how unrealistic it is. Because by the time you factor in rent, you factor in food, transportation, and so many things, you'll find out that a typical Nigerian worker will simply be living a life of slavery. So the position taken by Labour should be considered by the government and then see how a middle ground can be reached, and then this issue can be addressed, because it's one thing agreeing to increase the minimum wage and then the capacity to pay. And let us not forget that in the last few years, government has been finding it difficult to even pay the ones that is already on paper. So how this could be reflected should be considered. But from what we have learned, the government has, since the withdrawal of subsidy, government has more money in its own coffers. And there is no better way to effectively and productively spend it than to increase the minimum wage of Nigerian worker to a reasonable point where he can adequately take care of his family.
Well, that reasonable point seems to be where the challenge is. Organized labor has come up with a figure, about 615, saying, look, it's factored in transportation, food, health, and what have you, and came up with that figure, while government has come up with its own figures. Of course, Labour has questioned exactly how, the government came up with the 48 or so thousand naira proposal. But Tinubu says he's ready to, consider a living wage above a minimum wage. What do you make of that? He's saying, look, I'm willing to look at a wage that will reflect the labors of Nigerian workers. How can we meet that, get to that middle ground?
Well, you see, the demands of the labor will be supported naturally by the Nigerian workers. But whether our economy can support it is something else. Now, if you go through what has happened in the last 8 to 9 months, since the withdrawal of subsidy, many service providers, traders, marketers have used the issue of inflation to increase the price of almost everything. In Abuja here, when you talk of rent, you see how it has jumped. People who built their houses 20, 30 years ago are even aligning the price of cement to the increase of rent, and then foodstuffs and so many things. So I don't think that government has the resources to agree to a 615,000 minimum wage. But I believe that if you are talking of living wage, if you will live and not to die, there should be a sort of reasonable middle point. And from the tally that I've seen in Edo and Cross River, though some people say Edo jacked up because election is at hand, but whatever I see, government should at least take that into consideration, and if the Edo standard will be used, let it be used, and then issues, because the breakdown of this dialogue, of this talk, can lead to strike, and then it may lead to other things. So I want a situation where at least these talks can be productive, and we can reach a point where, first of all, wages should be increased, and then it should also be one which government can afford. Because if the federal government goes ahead to increase the minimum wage, and some states, because all states are not equal as it is.
Right.
Like in my own Kaduna state that has been strangulated by debt, which they can't even pay the 30,000 minimum wage. So if you jack up the prices, if you jack up the wages now, it's going to be a serious problem for many states.
Well, Senator Sani, it's amazing that when we come to minimum wage, we also talk about the power of each state, and we give sense of true federalism when it comes to minimum wage, as if every state is now trying to say, okay, we're running our own government and this is what we can afford. But listening to you, you've been so objective, and your concern here is that as we talk about minimum wage, we also must talk about what works. We must be pragmatic about that. Are you also thinking of leakages to also help the governments across levels, whether federal, state, local government, leakages that can be plugged? And of course, you're a lawmaker. Once a lawmaker, always a lawmaker. So you understand what we're talking about leakages and the size of government. Can that help in these states as well as the federal government in trying to get some monies to plow into what we already have to pay some of these wage?
Well, you see, what is happening in this country today is that economic reforms are taking place, and there are consequences of that reform. And anywhere in the world where you have economic reforms, there are bound to be sacrifices. But you see, sacrifices should be across board. Those on the upper echelon of society should be seen to be sacrificing, and then the masses on the ground, the downtrodden, should also make sacrifices. But where you have a situation where it's only those on the lower strata have been compelled or been pushed or been pressurized to make sacrifices, and those at the upper are not, there are bound to be issues. When you unfold these economic reforms, there should be evidence that cost of governance is being reduced, and those people holding position of authority and power are also evidently making sacrifices. But you see, people keep making references that lawmakers have been allocated billions to buy vehicles, and that it appears that it's only the masses that have been pressurized. Now, these are issues in countries of the world where you see those on the upper strata saying that they have cut the number of vehicles they use and that there will be no purchase of vehicles for luxury and that people have to do this, have to do that, and it's seen that leaders are also walking the talk. Now, people will say, okay, now since our leaders are also committing themselves to this and determined to do this, we will also do that. So, but when you have this kind of situation, workers will see that more money is coming in. State that usually gets less than monthly federal allocation that used to be within the range of 4, 5, 6, 700 billion is now in 1.5, 1.6 trillion. And they will say, okay, we need to have our own share. And you should know it very well that when a nation subsidizes, then it makes the value of wages, it makes more value to wages. But when subsidies are removed, then you have to pay for it. And in a system where not just withdrawal of subsidy and the issue of naira, but you have one tax or another coming in, tax on electricity, and I've had a new proposal coming on that VAT, that there's going to be increase in VAT. You know that if you don't increase the minimum wage, you are simply setting a ground for a serious national upheaval.
But what do you make of the continual breathing down the neck of the Nigerian government from the IMF, the World Bank? You know, they continue to say, look, you cannot continue with subsidies, whether it's of electricity or, you know, petrol and what have you. Do you think Nigerian government is under pressure to maybe please this, you know, Bretton Woods institutions? Is that what's at play? And to what end is that likely to be?
Well, you see, the two institutions, the World Bank and IMF, have of recent become more audacious in their relationship with the Nigerian government. And I have seen three statements coming either from the IMF or World Bank. One is that they blew a whistle that we were still subsidizing, and they said we shouldn't subsidize petroleum. And they raised the issue of subsidy on electricity, and they say we shouldn't subsidize electricity. And they also raised the point on CBN, that CBN is using Forex to strengthen the Naira. Now, it is time for our president and our government to have the muzzle, the gravitas to see that we are an independent country, and we have to implement our reforms as we deem fit, and that you can't come here and dictate to us what we should do and what we do. But you see, most people that are in the position of power are not that kind of radical leftist, Marxist, Leninist, or nationalists who can actually stand up. A lot of them are satraps and stooges of the West. So you won't find them being able to stand up and confront the existing global, not order, disorder as it is. Right. So these institutions are holding the economy by the balls because many of them have interest in the West, and as such, they will not be able to say that. But you see, in a middle way, you can see how Rwandan President Paul Kagame has been able to marry the interests of his country and also be able to effectively engage this institution without compromising the sovereignty and economic independence of his country. I think this is what we need in this country.
As we pursue that, it comes back to you wearing your civil society cap and look at what just happened, a walkout. And listening to you a while ago, you said we shouldn't allow it to get to that stage where we get to a stalemate and we get into strike actions, almost affecting all of those reforms that we're getting to see. What do you think will be the middle ground for both government and labor?
Well, the middle ground for government and labor is that some states have already set a standard, and that you said, okay, government should come down from its own high horse and said, this state has said 70 and we are also aligning with it. And then labor should discuss it, and then we now go. What you are asking for 650,000 naira or 615,000 is something which the Nigerian government cannot afford. And that when you are talking of wages, you are talking of people working at the private and public sector. And there are a larger percentage of Nigerians that are not on wages. So should we now consign a large chunk of our resources to payment of wages and issues of capital projects and other issues and servicing of debt and running of government should be abandoned, and then there should be some form of middle ground. But already, since the state's government have already laid a standard, I think government should simply look at it and accept it at that point.
And speaking of which, I mean, speaking of the state governments, isn't it time to really begin to knock them on the head on the issue of IGR and, you know, being creative enough to, you know, come up with ways to increase their, you know, internally generated, revenue?
You see, the issue of IGR has been so much discussed in a number of fora. In most cases, you find out that the IGR some states have been boasting to have are more of extortionists in one way, which they will increase the ground rent of people and increase tax on helpless and poor traders and make lives unbearable for them. It's not that money is invested in industry, in commerce, and as such revenues are generated from it. So I think it's important actually to emphasize on states to do a lot. For example, let's look at this point here. In the state of Kaduna, Nasarawa, and Niger, these are states that are rich in natural resources, in gold, in silver, in lithium, in so many things.
Yes.
Then you go to the bushes. If you don't find bandits, you find Chinese men collaborating with some Nigerians or Lebanese businessmen and are extracting this, and then the states are still poor. So we should be innovative. States should be innovative in terms of how they can generate revenue. And unfortunately also, in most of the states, they collect federal allocation to build bridges, and 95% of the industries in those states are dead. For example, if you come to my state, Kaduna now, Kaduna is the second most industrialized state in North after Kano. But if you go to the industrial area, you find out that almost 98% of the industries have all closed down. But you come to the city and see streets being expanded and bridges being built. So governors now have also inherited that mantra, saying development is being gauged on how you beautify the city and how you make it into a kind of a Singapore without the industry.
Before we let you go,
yes,
it's 1 year of the Tinubu administration, come May 29. What's your assessment? Some believe it's too early to make a definite assessment on the Tinubu administration. But what are your thoughts before we let you go?
Well, I can see that there are successes that are recorded, and also there are challenges. But if you are going to measure it on the two scales, one is that Nigeria is like now a construction site where reforms are unfolding, and it is said that the dividends of the reform and the benefits of the reform will come in 1 year time. So it means that you cannot access a building based on the fact that it's still a site. So as far as I'm concerned, they were able to take some courageous and bold decisions which we could have taken almost 15 to 20 years ago. But this is the fact. But the truth of the matter is that people are suffering, people are finding it difficult to live their lives, and the need for government to have human face in the reforms which they are implementing is of importance. The issue of minimum wage must be addressed. We shouldn't have more strikes, because if we do that, it's going to be more problematic for the government and for Nigerians as a whole.
Thank you so much for your submission. Shehu Sani, former senator representing Kaduna Central. It's been a delight having you on Newsnight. Hope you're back sooner than later.